And welcome to Connected Conversations for Creatives, a place where creatives like you can learn, grow, and connect. I'm your host, Jennifer Carr. It is fascinating how a solitary moment can wield the power to alter the course of our existence. Think back to that one moment when a decision was made, a chance encounter occurred, or an opportunity was seized. These singular moments often stand as the milestones of our lives, etched into our memory with vivid clarity. They are catalysts that prompt introspection, urging us to reassess goals, values, and aspirations. Upon closer examination, however, we realize that life's narrative is not a sequence of isolated patches, but rather this vast tapestry woven from countless threads. Before and after those transformative moments, there's a myriad of smaller events, each subtly nudging us in directions that we may never have chosen on our own. These seemingly trivial instances, though often overshadowed by the enormity of defining moments, play an equally crucial role in shaping our thoughts, our perspectives, and our character. Today's guest can vouch for this, as he has lived a life of resilience and triumph through many different adversities. Having survived a prognosis of a 1% chance of survival after a major accident, he is a walking miracle who has transformed his life from being a victim to being a victor, giving testament to the power of the human spirit. He's a motivational speaker, a newly published author whose autobiography can be found on Amazon. I'd like to welcome Ethan Poetic to the show. So welcome, Ethan.
Thank you very much, Jennifer Carr. I appreciate the intro, the acknowledgement, and this opportunity of being on your platform to share the experience of mental health, how you can go from victim to victor.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. So let's just jump in here and just give us a quick background about you and about how you got from where you were to where you are now.
I'm originally from Coastal, Pennsylvania. It's a town in Chester County, and I was born in Brandywine Hospital on a hot Saturday, as my mom would say. And I was declared Ethan Alexander. At the time, I took my mom's maiden name, Vaughn. But fast forward many years later, in December 2021, I literally changed my last name to Poetic. Um, that's when I was born. My parents were never together. My dad was actually with somebody else, and he already had a child with that woman. And he ended up having two women pregnant at the same time. And my mom was one of them. I ended up playing sports, football, basketball, track and field. And in the middle of my 8th grade year, my mom decided to move to Lancaster, PA, where I met several new people, helping with that transition from making new friends at Wheatland Middle School to people in the neighborhood of Sterling Place, Lancaster City. And when I got involved with sports, it was through several coaches such as Coach Matt Ortega, Coach Troy Richardson, also known as Coach T, Coach Aline Camara, Coach Damian Henry, Coach Scott Feldman, Coach Susie, Coach now known as Dr. Ty Mealy, Coach Booth, Coach Feaster, Coach Joe Cyphers, and many others. It's a big transition to move in the middle of the school year and have a 8th grade promotion, and my both my parents weren't even there. And yeah, that's a brief intro.
Okay. So I read your autobiography over the last week, just kind of to get to know you a little better before we had our conversation. And you talk a lot about your family dynamics and growing up in a single parent household. Would you share with the listeners just some of the challenges you faced growing up in a single parent household?
I'll go back to, let's see. I'll say my dad's mom was a single parent. Basically, she had gotten pregnant as a teenager at the age of 13 or 14. And as I researched her history and legacy, her mom was raising both her and her granddaughter until my grandma became of age to start working. Because back in the early 1900s, certain women did not have as much working opportunity unless they had seniority with somebody to vouch for them, a certain trade, went against the grain, or an exception to the rule of work. And that's why women were more traditional back then, to where they had to raise their children at home while the men go out in the work field. Then my mom became a single mother due to various choices. First, my older brother was born. She may have had him either right after high school or a year later after high school. And then almost 10 years later, I become born, but we have different dads. And then somewhere along the way after I become born, my mom meets a different man. He ends up becoming my stepfather. And they end up cohabitating together for several years and had 2 children together. And I just remember the day he left, packed up bags, opened up the door, picked it up. and was gone, never came back. And it was a defining moment of I was spending more time with him since he was living with us than I was with my biological father. And with my biological father, this is where I gotta keep it 100. He, he was working, he was paying the child support, but unfortunately, he repeated the same cycle that was done to him by his father. And when you don't have a male inside the household, certain people turn to different things for acceptance, hearing words of affirmation, confide in somebody. For me, I was able to find that in sports, video games, certain family members that were male figures. Unfortunately, for some people in life, they turn to the streets, drugs, gangs, and eventually, end up in a place where you wish you wouldn't there to begin with. Some of the dynamics I faced was when we had my stepdad living with, it was two incomes coming in,
Mhm.
and when he leaves, not only does he get to start a new life, there goes his income. Now we're living in this house. Now my mom has to depend on Section 8, food stamps, Medicaid. She was already receiving 2 child support checks. Now it's about to become 3. And it just changed the dynamics of me seeing life at the time in Coatesville with I'm seeing everybody else with their family members who has a dad that's present, calling them to come in before it's late at night. For me, I have more freedom, maybe a little too much. But I also realized some of those men in the neighborhood I lived in on Oak Street and New Street treated me like their own child. They welcomed me in their homes, allowed me to eat. And this is during a time period where, there was no social media such. If you wanted to do something, like you had to get out there and be active. I like to think those men fulfilling that void as well. Eventually, a part of my book, I talk about it where a fan hits the wall for me, where I realized my parents were not actually getting along. It happened at a football game. But prior to the football game, prior to me starting 6th grade, my sister's born, and I was already with somebody cohabitating. And I remember the day like it was yesterday where he picks us up from the house, takes us to the Brandywine Hospital. I see my newborn baby sister, innocent, and I just remember us taking pictures. I still got some of those pictures now. I remember seeing my mom in the hospital bed. Then we get dropped off at home. My mom's still at the hospital. Eventually, she does get home. And unfortunately, for that second stepdad, he goes on a drug and alcohol binge down in Philadelphia. And I didn't understand it at the time. What I can say now, looking back on it, it goes back to mental health issues, where when a person doesn't resolve their underlying pain, wounds, scars, triggers, suppressed memories, or flashbacks, it starts to eat them up alive. And eventually you start turning to things that are not meant for you to turn to. But it also shows the foundation we're going to stand on. And sometimes it's quicksand, sometimes it's lava, or any other thing. And I just remember, a dynamic of also my mom wants me to live with my dad, even though we had a strange relationship. And then eventually, that situation didn't work out because he had signed me up for football late. And one day I get this, I remember like it's yesterday at the football game. It was after the football game was over. I come out from going to one of those urinals for the bathroom. I see my parents arguing after the football game's over. And that's when my reality hit that something isn't right. I leave with my dad. He sends me to go to my mom's house to get my sneakers. I wasn't even in the house but a minute where a phone call happens. And it's my stepdad. He asks me, "Where you at? Where you at?" I'm at the house upstairs. And he says, "Stay right there. Your mom's on the way." But at the same time, there's a knock on the door. It sounds like the glass is about to break. And my dad opens up the door and says, "Let's go, let's go." And I have a choice to make: stay here till my mom gets here or leave. By me hearing the bass of my dad's voice, I left with him, but I wasn't able to find my sneakers. So the next day, I ended up going to school wearing football cleats. And it was quite embarrassing to the point where where the next situation becomes accountability, but also a blessing.
Mm.
Where the gym teacher was just couldn't believe it. So I get attention, tell my dad, tell my stepmom, "Hey, this is why I got attention." He tells my stepmom, "Oh, just pick him up." So the next day I started my gym attention, and the gym teacher was just wondering why would I come to the school with football cleats. I tell him the situation. He feels sorry for me, like, "Whoa, I didn't know all this." And eventually he just tell me, "You know what? You get to go." So he cuts me a break due to something that's out of my control. I go out, my friends are out telling me my mom's looking for me. 10 seconds later, I look to my right, my mom says, "You're coming with me." Then we go outside to her car. My stepmom pulls up. Her and my mom have a brief conversation that lasts less than 20 seconds. And then I leave with my mom, go to the house, and then sometime later, my dad comes knocking on the door, and well, it's pretty much like a person dealing with battles in a war. And in this situation, my mom won the war, where she wasn't giving up me to live with him ever again because he betrayed her trust. Because part of the reason why they were arguing was my grandmom had called my mom to come to her house because she told her that my dad's filing for full custody. Well, that's not the original agreement they agreed upon. And my aunt was right there at the house at the time. And that's part of the reason why my mom took me back. And well, long story short, my dad left there as a sad man. That became the beginning of an estranged relationship. And I talk about that in detail in my book.
Yeah, looking back, do you recognize the number of people that were um, brought into your realm, into your influence that made major impacts on you that at the time you thought, man, I wish somebody cared. But looking back, do you see these people who stepped in and said, hey, I've got your back?
As a kid, I didn't really understand it. I see some situations where, okay, somebody may take me out for clothes shopping. Somebody may take me and my siblings out to get haircuts. Or I can stay the night at this aunt's house or this aunt's house. I remember just going to the family cookouts, visiting our grandmoms. And, it's kind of like surreal during those time periods where things were so normal. But the reason why it became so surreal because there was a hidden factor of where we were suffering in silence
Mm.
because the adults who were supposed to have those conversations with us weren't doing that, but they're having the conversations among themselves and other people. But eventually it circles back to us as children. And those type of dynamics shows that if you're not willing to be a real parent and communicate with your child about something you're responsible for, it's going to eventually bite you in the butt. Where when a child becomes a teenager, it's going to be resentment. And it's going to be this great wall of China. Then eventually, it's going to become greater resentment where the child or teenager becomes an adult, and you end up having a strange relationship with them to the point where I've seen many times where that adult child doesn't want that parent around the grandchildren. They don't want the cycle to be repeated. And some people live in this denial, create this narrative of they're the victim when they're really the oppressor. They are the person who wants to victimize other people. And some people will be blinded by some things by wanting to do so much for other people, but don't want to do their own work on themselves at an individual level. Also, when I moved to Lancaster, the Amish and Midnights played a pivotal role where I saw things differently. I remember visiting this guy's house. He had over 10 kids with one woman, yet they did not depend on the government for food stamps, welfare, healthcare, Medicaid, and they were homeowners. They had independence. And part of that was the parents in that community installed and invested in them, not just the faith, but also opportunity to where you don't need a GED to make it in life. You can learn this trade, learn this skill, and we know the hiring people. Therefore, you're going to make 20 plus an hour or more, provide not only for you but also your family. We know independent banks that give you the loan for this house you want to start your own family. And the women were so conservative; they had these traditional values, and that helped me see things differently. Like there's more to life than me just being in a single parent household. Then also sports with sports teaches like the game of life. I remember this one movie where I think it's called Fireproof, where his coach wanted his best player to do the death crawl from the first yard line all the way up to the 50-yard line with a teammate on his back. And eventually, he wanted to give up after he crossed the finish line. But the thing is, the coach made sure he had a blindfold before he started. He told him, "I want you to give me everything you got, absolutely everything." Even though the player crossed the 50-yard line, the coach kept telling him to go and go and go. And eventually, he reached the end zone. The teammate, the best player, cried, tears of joy. Like, I gave it everything I got. And he told him, take out the blindfold. And he told him, you're in the end zone. You're the leader of this team. I need you to lead by example and do more than expected. And that taught me in my life that I need to do more than was expected of me, and that include going against the grain of not turning to drugs, the alcoholism, and other bad behavior patterns because I don't want to be remembered for that stuff because it tarnishes the legacy and reputation. And eventually, people want to distance themselves from you.
Mm. Going back to looking at the Amish and the Mennonite communities that you were talking about, I think one of the basic foundations that they have is community. They build a community around them. They support one another. They have each other in whatever comes about. They're always willing to help and lend a hand. And with that is also the basic proponent of family, which is a closer knit community. And so the fact that they do focus on community, and the fact that as I read your story, and even the at the beginning, just the testimonials that people wrote, about you and about your experience and their relationship with you. And I think there were a couple of coaches in there and that kind of thing. And just the fact that you did have a community that you may not have recognized at the time. So I think that that is an excellent example of how you can start to break the cycle, is surrounding yourself with people who are going to lift you up and encourage you and inspire you, even if you don't see it at the time.
Yeah, I also realized in my 30s, I realized there's more cycles for me to break.
Mm.
Like when it's time for me to settle down, find the right woman, have children. I realized everything that wasn't done for me by my biological father, I have to do for my kids.
Mm.
And that's really requiring me to look at life even differently from a perspective of, okay, this person didn't do for me, but now I gotta go even further and really step out the comfort zone to grow even more. And it's just like this self-discovery of, I thought, okay, I broke the cycle by not doing some of the things he did. I thought that was it, but it turns out there's more work to do. And that really gave me a broader perspective of just looking at life even more differently as I just see how certain men act towards their children, good, healthy way, and versus not so healthy ways. Sometimes men, have to be assertive to get their point across, but I also see some men who are sometimes passive, and I also see some men who talk with a normal voice but let their actions speak. And I realize they're being more respected, they're being more appreciated, and they know how to set the boundaries without having this my way or the highway mentality. I also realize they have mentors and they're continuing to blossom and have an open door policy with their children. And then when it comes to them being with their wives, it's just, well, I'll just say right off the bat, it's best to have premarital counseling. That way you can air
Yes.
out anything that needs to be aired out instead of just finding out about it inside a marriage. Because if you found out all this stuff beforehand, you would know like a buyer beware sale. But in this situation, buyer beware marriage license before you sign it, buyer beware before you say I do, buyer beware before you a man gets on one knee, buyer beware before a woman says yes, buyer beware if her father's still around to give her away or somebody else. These are prerequisites, that people need to know about instead of just, focusing on having a good time of something good to eat, maybe walk in the park. Because eventually, part of your relationship with a person is the business side, and yeah, the finances. Sometimes the talk about prenup will be mentioned because nobody wants to lose half of everything due to someone found, just want to give up on the marriage or step outside. You got to have provisions. And I realize, in life, life is a journey, life is a marathon, and it takes two people understanding their roles. I remember one of the interviews I did with this guy called Mr. Robinson. He explained that, when he met his wife, he already had two kids by two different women, but at the same time, his girlfriend was willing to take on that responsibility and like the life that he was living. And she wanted to create a life with him as a life partner. And that's some of the things that are being taught or want to be learned is learning life skills and do life with a person you're married with.
Yeah. So my marriage and family counselor heart, like that is what I have done for the past 10 years, and before I became an author. And I would take it one step farther and say premarital counseling is fantastic. It's great. I think every couple should go through it. But before that, start doing the heart work on your own. I think every individual would benefit from counseling and therapy from a good counselor or therapist, and not just a mentor, but someone who can, professionally invest in your life. Because if two healthy people come together, like mentally and emotionally and spiritually stable and healthy people come together, it's a lot easier to find that common ground. That foundation is firmer from the get-go. So yeah, I think you're onto something with premarital counseling, but take it one step farther and work on yourself before you even try to work on a relationship.
Yeah, that takes humility right there, where a person, owns their own stuff,
Yes.
and that takes time that a person has to be intentional about.
Mhm.
Because if you see a person with a pattern of failed dating relationships out, there's a reason why. And you can't always point the finger at somebody, even though there's some things are justified. So I realize we sometimes learn more from failure than success. And I learned from a lot of failures in my relationships with my parents, and it's just I tell people all the time, I'm not responsible for the choices, but I felt the effects,
Mhm.
the experience on the front lines. And eventually I did confront both of them. And, I didn't have to do that, but I did it due to some people encouraging me. And I also realized it's better to say what needs to be said or give someone an olive branch, before, someone leaves this earth. I see some people who are coming out of adoption agencies, foster care, don't even know their biological parents or family unless they take an ancestry DNA test. There are a few people I was helping bridge the gap with. Other people, I had to suggest that they hire a genealogist since they have a bigger database to find out who has a more closer connection for their DNA. And if you want to invest a few dollars and have an ultimate goal of seeking the truth of your identity and the whereabouts of other people, you eventually find what you're looking for. The good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful. And I sometimes suggest to them, what are the names on your birth certificate? What have you gone to the adoption agency or the foster care agency for your file? Figure out who's the parent or guardian that gave up parental rights, or was it just a situation that was so dynamic where the courts deemed your biological parents unfit? I've seen some situations where a woman was pregnant, gave birth, but never told the biological man. I've seen some situations where some people were in the military, were together, broke up. One person says they're pregnant, but they never saw each other for almost 20 years due to lost connection. Then I've seen one situation where a man was born in America, but then got adopted over in Europe, and he don't even know who his biological father is.
Yeah, having those, it is a sad situation, and having those connections matter, because there's always going to be an innate part of us that wants to know where we came from. And sometimes you can learn those things. Sometimes you can find the answers that you're looking for, and sometimes you can't, which is why it's so important to make sure that in that process, when you are looking for who am I, where did I come from, that you have a support system in place that says, you know what, it matters, but whatever you find out, when you come back, we're going to be right here, to support you, regardless of what the answers are that you find.
Yeah, I was able to do a lot of self-discovery myself with
Mhm.
understanding that I'm not the only person who had an estranged father. I'm not the only person who came from a single parent household. It's just more the hurdle of learning how to deal with on an individual level. And that's really like the difference maker of understanding how to move forward and how to encourage other people and pass down certain information so that they can do better in a much sooner way.
Mm. Yeah. So let's talk about, like, thinking of those connections and the experiences that we face that can change everything just in a heartbeat. One of the major events in your life was a life-altering accident. Would you care to talk about that, and maybe some moments leading up to it, how it changed your perspective on life?
Yes, let's see. What I'm about to tell you is like a combination of me using my imagination and some information I was told and some information that I was able to find out in certain parts I remember. Basically, it was a Saturday morning where we were at Mia Heights Golf Tournament, helped raise some funding for a nonprofit organization that was at the time it was called Children Deserve a Chance Foundation. The CEO is Jordan Steffi, actually former CEO. He's now just the founder and serves on the board now. It was a transition period for him. Now it has rebranded to Atalo. And we was able to raise money through selling Dewsbury watches and donations and helping, his cause. And eventually me and my family leave. And then we end up on Lincoln Highway. The last thing I remember seeing was the Hess gas station. and passing by the Tanger outlets, the Rockville outlets, an Olive Garden, and then I wake up in the ICU unit with stews in my chest, IVs in both arms, a left black eye, and I remember just losing all this weight, nobody telling me what happened. Then when I did get told I was involved in a near-fatal car accident, I just couldn't believe it. It was like, is this a movie? Is this the Matrix? It it just felt a way of I touch this bar here, I touch this bar. This is real. I'm looking at this newspaper, I touch it. I'm like, whoa. And I realized, sometime later where the reason why it felt unreal for me because I was heavily medicated on medicines. So much so that it desensitized me with my senses to the point where like it's like if I would shake your hand in real life, you would feel the nerve endings. If I would shake your hand and you wear an oven mitt, you won't feel the nerve endings. The medicine blocked the nerve endings because of all the pain and suffering I was enduring in life during that moment. This is where I use my imagination. Where can you imagine the police halting traffic almost 5 miles both ways while a sedan car runs into an 18-wheeler?
Mm.
Can you imagine the police using the yellow tape to block off the scene, filling out the police reports, taking pictures? Can you imagine the news reporters and news people driving real fast to get the breaking news story? Can you imagine the radio people talking about this? Can you imagine people writing on my wall of Facebook, like, we don't want you to go, but we're praying for you? Can you imagine the fire department cutting the car in half with the jaws of life while taking my pulse to see if I got a beat or any blood flow? Can you imagine them extracting me out and put me on a stretcher with a neck brace with the help of the ambulance while they're driving almost 40 miles away to the nearest hospital where I should have died within 3 to 5 minutes due to internal bleeding? And then what's the other thing? Oh, basically, emergency surgery's done. I was told a woman died, because she thought I died on the operating table. Because after the surgery was done, it's just time to put me inside the ICU unit where it's either I wake up or I don't wake up. And time passes away. I'm on over 30 prayer lists around the United States and probably around the world. And it was that big of a situation. So one day I wake up, and that's the day I became declared a walking living miracle. And in that same moment, the woman who cried tears of joy that I survived as she saw me wake up in a cloud nine state.
Yeah. So you had lived a good portion of your life and experienced so many different circumstances and situations. How did waking up that day, or, reflecting back on it, because I'm sure that day was a blur. I know what it is to wake up from surgery, and I can't imagine having woken up from something even more traumatic. But so looking back, and then looking forward from that moment, if you were to like eagle eye view it, what changed in your perspective on life?
A lot of things changed. I thought I was the only person involved in the car accident. Turned out a couple other people died. One person had a lot of injuries, and the other person had to go to like a hospital up in Hershey, like a children's hospital. And I remember a lot of visitors coming in when I wasn't as heavily sedated. Then I also remember just the humbleness of just depending on a lot of people spending time to come visit me in the hospital as a visitor. I remember us having Bible study at the rehabilitation place inside my room, which is much bigger than the hospital room. Or we got Bible study in the visiting room, where there's a television. Then there's also rehab where I had to learn how to walk again, talk again, speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, being on that feeding tube. The moving forward part was just there's more to it. And I talk about it in the book where it involves, my parents not being let's say not making healthy choices during that time period. That information can be found in the book. I don't want to like give people, life coming attracting to that just yet. I just want to say, moving forward, I was able to change my life in the perspective of not wanting to give up, not wanting to give in. I remember one time period there was a special ceremony held for me for like with some holy oil. because I was not used to eating or drinking. And I was told by the doctor that if I eat or drink anything, become a larynx, I got paralyzed, that I was suffering pneumonia. And that'll make everything much worse. And well, let's just say it's gonna take more antibiotics to stop pneumonia.
Mm.
Where I'm at now is in a better place. Got my driver's license, a brand new car, my own business, two-time college graduate, numerous awards and accolades. Uh, I graduated from Harrisburg Area Community College, Mills University. Prior to all that, uh, I was able to use social media to to my advantage. Where when I would come into work, parents have access to the internet, and they want to know who's working with your kids, whether it's a sports coach, assistant, teacher assistant, building assistant, because they want to go above and beyond just what an HR department does. And when my name came up on their phone, there's times where they asked me, "Hey, is this you from the car accident?" And I just did not feel comfortable talking about that because I thought, "Hey, I overcame all this stuff and some extra stuff. I thought I could just move on in my life and just go off in the sunset." But it just didn't go like that. And one of the key moments was understanding the big broader situation of one of my bosses told me, "Your inspiration, you gotta learn how to deal with it." And then I also realize when you have something that big happens with so much news coverage, social media coverage, radio coverage. I'm not sure if there was any podcast coverage or not. And then so many people remembering the situation and being there, seeing me in the hospital, the rehab, visiting me at the home, but seeing how I am now, they look at things differently in the perspective of he has overcame this stuff and this doesn't define him. He has redefined it. And eventually, I was able to use social media to show people, let's move forward by recognizing other leaders, student athletes. That way I could divert the attention I was getting to somebody else. Because at the time to be inspiration is a time for me to focus on life. Because I don't want to get caught up on being so inspirational that I lose out on staying grounded. Eventually, mainstream media was able to bridge the gap where I was featured on the front page of the Langston newspaper April 1st, 2021. Prior to that, that was one of the biggest interviews, intense interviews I've ever had. The writer was John Walk, LMP newspaper. I remember the day I received a text. I was at Chester High School. Chester High just defeated Westchester School for the District 1 championship. And I got the text. John Walk wanted to interview me. How he knew about the accident was a council member and a good friend of mine, and she's also alumni of J.P. McCaskey and a native of Puerto Rico and New York. Her name is Jenna Diaz. I asked her, could I receive a proclamation declaration? And she made an agenda to make it happen. And during the time period, it was during COVID. And long story short, I told, the council members, some of them already knew, including the mayor, Denise Srirachi. When it was time to vote, they all voted yay, which is yes. And John Walk just so happened to be there and found out my contact information. After I got featured on the front page of the newspaper, and then I got interviewed by Barbara Barb of WJL. She's a reporter. She's an alumni of J.P. McCaskey, American University. That interview was less intense, and I got featured on television on a mainstream level as well. Yeah, when those two things happened, I thought I was gonna need a police escort to work, but
Oh,
eventually, the bridge was able to show people I moved forward, I transitioned into a greater version of myself.
nice. So clearly, your past and your present and probably even your future is going to be spent just inspiring and encouraging people who either come from a similar background or who face similar adversities or who just need encouragement to move through whatever it is that is in front of them. So with that being said, what is one word of advice or encouragement that you would like listeners to walk away with? If they hear nothing else, what do you want them to hear?
Don't allow your failures, hardships, adversities, and words of disapproval or discouragement to define you.
Mm.
You can redefine life yourself. This earth is over 2,000 years old. So let's learn how to use those stories as the blueprint on how to navigate through the game of life. And of course, don't invest more than you can afford to lose.
Ooh, that's a good one. That is definitely something that Sometimes we talk about, oh, you got to take the risk, you got to take the risk, and it's like, well, do you really have enough to back up the risk just in case? Because we have to fail in order to learn. I mean, that is where learning comes from, is not knowing something, trying it, and then realizing, oh, that's not how you do that, let me try again. So yeah, that's a very good one. If you can't back it, don't charge it. So Ethan, is there anything else you'd like to share or talk about?
Yeah, I'm looked up to by a lot of kids on social media around the world and in person in several communities and sports. They didn't know about my story until I would always post, this is my anniversary as a Walk of the Miracle. It's my way to give honor and glory to, you know, a supernatural situation. And, it also sheds light on who I am outside the workplace, in the public eye, in social media. It's more authentic posts. And for me, it doesn't matter how many likes or shares I get when it comes to me posting about my anniversary. I see it more as a celebration of life. I was able to have a great celebration with my college graduation on an independent level during COVID. And then sometime later, I went all out and had my 10-year anniversary as a Walking Living Miracle. I really did go all out. And then just learn to tell people that this is what I went through, this is the blueprint of how I overcame it. Prior to this car accident, I used to be a student athlete like you. I used to be in that same classroom like you. But I could also tell certain leaders in my journey is that my story relates to business where it requires resiliency, building relationships, and continue to educate yourself in the game of life because not everything's going to happen on time. Some things just happen in a moment, either before or after the situation takes place. And it takes caveats of learn to adjust and use your skills. For me, I'm able to understand that I'm gifted in a lot of areas, but being not that I'm bragging, sometimes the jack of all trades, a master of some. But I learned, even though I was struggling with math in college, it became a strength once I learned I can get help from the college professor, the tutor, the private tutor, and putting in more work than usual. And I tell certain kids when it comes to reading, all you gotta do is connect with a kid that reads better than you or an adult that reads better than you. And eventually the gap is gonna be bridged there. And it got to the point where administrators start buying my autobiography, the inspirational story of Ethan Poetic, Chronicle of Adversities, Education, Sports, Relationships, and Resiliency. They start using it as a guide to tell certain students that you can overcome your adversities like Ethan overcame his near-death situation. You can overcome your father not being there for you or being in a single-parent household just like Ethan did. There's been times where, uh, not that I say their names, there's been times where certain teachers stopped their lesson plans and want me to speak. I was kind of like, "Are you sure?" She's like, "Yeah, you speak to the kids while I get a cup of coffee. Do you want to worry about when I come back?" And, and all eyes are me, and just figuring out what do I tell these kids. The lesson plan is, kind of like put on hold while I speak to the kids about certain things about my book, uh, from the adversities to the hardships. We'll also talk about certain poems that are kid appropriate, and also talking about certain things. Sometimes I can talk about the car accident, and there's times where I'm like, I'm not ready to speak about this during the workplace. Workplace, I'm just ready to focus on life. But then also give them life lessons on never giving up on themselves, understand they have a purpose for their life. I remember one journey where I was invited to speak at Lancashire Country Day, middle school. This guy I knew. This is during my recovery process. I also write poetry and I'm a spoken word artist. The teacher wanted somebody to teach poetry because she didn't want to just speak about it. She wanted someone who experienced it and has that it factor, and that was me. I was able to go in past the interview process, and eventually I was able to speak to the kids about poetry where they understood, allow them to be hands-on with the drawings. It felt more like a poetry workshop. And that's when I knew I could become a keynote speaker. And that did bridge the gap for me in a lot of ways. Moving forward, the book is available on most major platforms thanks to Ingram Spark. It's available as a soft cover, hardcover laminated case, ebook, and pretty soon the audio version where I speak of myself in first person. Again, my title of my book is called The Inspirational Story of Ethan Poetic, Chronicles of Adversities, Education, Sports, Relationships, and Resiliency. It's available print on demand on Amazon, Kobo, Barnes& and Noble, Walmart, Target, or you can buy the book directly from me on my website, ethanspeaks.com. I would charge you for the book that you want, and shipping, handling, and the book should be given to you within 2 days. The difference is when you pay through Amazon in order to get Prime membership, Prime for delivery, you gotta make sure your order's worth 25 or more. But if you buy through me, I save you some money. And I accept, payment through Cash App, Venmo, PayPal, Zelle, and my social media handles on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube is Ethan Poetic. I also still got my other page, which is Ethan Vaughn, Ethan Vaughn, even though I gave Facebook the legal documents to change my last name on that main profile. Well, I guess I need to talk to Mark Zuckerberg. Yeah. And then on Twitter, it's Ethan V23. Then on Snapchat, Instagram, and TikTok, my username is Ethan Poetic 23. And again, for serious speaking engagements, inquiries, you may find me on ethanspeaks.com, which is my website. And again, serious inquiries as seen on WJL, Langston Newspaper, Southeast Times Newspaper, Millsville University Snapper Newspaper, the Harrisburg Area Community College newsletter, then as recognized by Democrats, Republicans, and city officials. There's 2 magazine articles that are online, and many other accolades that I could name. So again, serious inquiries. Thank you.
Thank you, Ethan, for hanging out with me today. I wish for you the biggest and brightest blessings as you take the next steps on your journey. And, I hope everyone leaves here knowing that they may not have a hugely dramatic story to share, but we all have stories inside of us to share. And if we are just willing to share our story with one person, it could make all the difference for that one person. So thank you for being willing to share your story with us today.
Thank you very much, Jennifer Carr, for allowing this opportunity, your time. It's for us to bridge the gap with mental health. You know, mental health is very important for your wealth, your purpose, and you don't have to carry the excess baggage. You can always unpack it, whether it's verbally, talk therapy, writing, texting, or in some other language.
Absolutely. And authors, if you are looking for resources to help you write better stories and more relatable characters, visit my website, jcarwrites.com/authors.